Hello, welcome back to Spillin the Tea with Dr. P. That's me. And guess what, y'all? I have another amazing doctor here with me today, Dr. Michele Ross, who's going to introduce herself and tell her about all the goodness that she does and all the things that she brings to this world. So I'm super excited to talk to her today as we are here in August and talking about women and women's health and all the things and all the fun things. But let's get to it. Dr. Ross, tell us who you are. Hey, girl.
Hey there. Well, I am so excited to do this live stream with you. My name is Dr. Michele Ross. I'm a neuroscientist. I also have an MBA. So I've been working in a lot of different sectors, but I started off in drug addiction research, actually. I grew up in New Jersey, across the street from somebody who dealt drugs. So I was like, I'm going to save the world from drug addiction. That's how I started my career.
Wow.
Totally 180, because now I work as a cannabis scientist, educating patients and doctors about the benefits of plant medicine, including CBD, cannabis, mushroom, kratom, Ayurvedic medicine, all of that. For mental health and women's health. So it's sort of interesting. It's like, how did I go from that to where I am right now? So there's so many pieces in that, but I'll give you a little like my lifetime movie story, because it's peppered with some fun stuff here. So I'm definitely not your traditional scientist, although if you meet anyone from the cannabis industry, most of us are pretty interesting characters, to say the least. But I started off, a traditional scientist. I worked in a department of molecular psychiatry, so I studied the effects of cocaine, morphine, cannabinoids on basically brain health, and try to figure out what causes people to become addicted to these types of drugs, and how we can, better help them be abstinent if they choose to. And I also study things like Prozac and Adderall and how they impacted the brain. And so I really understand, how the workings of how some of these mental health drugs work and how they're tested on male mice, tested on male men, and then prescribed to women, which is a whole nother problem.
Right.
I moved from the lab actually to, and I did my PhD in Texas, Dallas, Texas, which of course doesn't have cannabis or anything. Really, I mean, like sort of, they have CBD. But I moved to California, which is the first state to have actually legalized medical marijuana. So very interesting place. I had never been really exposed to legal cannabis or anything. I didn't work in that industry when I first moved out there, but I was actually doing a postdoc at Caltech. I got recruited by TV. I ended up doing reality TV. I was the first scientist on reality television.
Nice.
I did Big Brother, which is airing actually right now, a different season, like season 23. I was on season 11. But I did that, and I didn't return to academia. I started doing consulting for like pharmaceutical products, supplement products, and things like that, and started establishing my own business. I did a lot of like PR spokesperson type of work, science education programs, like worked with Howie Mandel. Like I literally probably filmed like 10 shows that never aired. That's how Hollywood works. We're like, we filmed all the series, somebody bought it, and then it never aired. But I did a lot of that kind of work, and also formulated different brands, worked with celebrities and their like nutraceutical brands, then married somebody in the cannabis industry. So that's how I got roped in. But actually, I actually, my very first paper when I was a graduate student was actually on cannabis. So how cannabis grows brain cells, both synthetic cannabinoids and plant-based cannabinoids. So I started off there. It was like completely like, oh my goodness, I just entered the cannabis industry. I was actually really passionate about brain health and cannabinoids, but wasn't just like, I really didn't see it as like a career path. Like, okay, I'm going to like get in and start selling weed or something. Right. And so hilariously, I married somebody who sold weed. So he was basically like, here you are, you're like a leading, brain health scientist. California is very much not medical based. And he was trying to help a lot of patients, cancer patients, different types of patients. He's like, I'm not a doctor, like, you are. So like, let's start having you counsel these people and like get them better. And so we worked together. We opened up our nonprofit called the Endocannabinoid Deficiency Foundation, which was later called Impact Network. But we were just, working together with patients. I ended up writing a lot of the first articles on cannabis and women's health in like the whole internet. This sounds so crazy because right now you type in like cannabis and anything, and you get 8,000 articles, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, we were talking about, about 10 years ago, it really wasn't anything. You type in like, how does cannabis help lupus? How does cannabis help endometriosis? Should be like nothing, like literally nothing. You would have to go to the literature if there was a paper published, and there wasn't as much research back then. So I wrote a lot of stuff. I wrote a 400-page book called Vitamin Weed. I developed the first certification for doctors and other practitioners on cannabis and motherhood, which is a really controversial topic. I did a lot of the first education with Green Flower Media, which is a big online platform, which is also partnered with universities now on different cannabis topics. So it's like I went into cannabis research, cannabis education, also advocating for patients too to create good drug laws across the country, because as we know, it's nice when you live in a place where cannabis is legal, and it's actually life-threatening if you live in a state where it's not, or a country where it's not. Literally, it's a life or death decision of where you live sometimes. Having lived in Texas and knowing that there were breast cancer patients that couldn't get cannabis until they drive to a legal state, like that's not okay. And so it was my real joy as both a patient and a researcher to really help support the drug legalization movement in this country. So I've been on all ends of the spectrum. So it's just like from education to entertainment, research. So it's like when I say I'm the cool like sex, drug, and rock and roll scientist, but like also I'm like the sweet like scientist next door that's like, here, take the weed for your period pain. So.
I love it. Oh my God. As you were talking, I'm like writing everything. I'm like, this is amazing. Okay, cannabis and women's health. And you started off with addiction in the brain, and then you ended up doing work with cannabis, right? And then cannabis and motherhood, and all of those topics are so very important to me. And then, of course, the politics behind cannabis, right? So, of course, I love the example that you gave with the woman that may have breast cancer and she's driving to another state to get cannabis, but also thinking about historically what cannabis has done, where before it became popular and it became part of medical use, people were already treating illnesses, right? And it was considered like this alternative medicine. And when people were selling it to them, it wasn't legalized. And sometimes those people got caught either using it for their health issues or selling it for whatever reasons, and then got caught up in politics and incarceration and things like that. But that's a whole nother kind of topic that we could go off on later if we have time for it. But it is interesting to now think about how cannabis is legalized. And we've been knowing this for years about the health benefits of it, right? Like certain populations absolutely knowing, but now it's starting to get the attention that it needs to get. So I'm super excited about that. Before I get deeper into some of these other questions, I want to know a little bit about cannabis and motherhood. You said it's controversial, and if you can't tell, everything about me is controversial, so I want to know about it. Tell me.
Okay, so when I first launched this certification, I was getting like sort of like death threats from different doctors and professors, like you're going to have these mothers smoking marijuana and they're all going to have fetal marijuana syndrome, and their babies are going to come out brain dead and things like that. There is a lot of misconceptions about cannabis. And when we talk about cannabis and motherhood, it's really important to think we're not just talking about pregnant women. We're talking about all phases of motherhood. So we're talking about getting pregnant. We're talking about being pregnant, labor, breastfeeding, postpartum depression, parenting. There's all different stages of motherhood. And I think that the cannabis, CBD, and other natural plant medicines can have a really important role if you use them right, and if you understand what the health benefits and risks are. And so I'm always about, okay, no drug, nothing, not even water is safe, if you use it wrong. So you really have to be educated. But the thing is that doctors, right, due to malpractice, due to some of the government guidelines and things like that, are so scared about talking about cannabis with anyone. Never mind a pregnant woman. They just come to, okay, drugs are bad. They think about things like heroin, and they're like, oh, we don't want these marijuana addicted babies. But I actually have a really interesting background, because my PhD was actually on studying the birth of new brain cells in the adult brain as well as the developing brain. And so I know what drugs do, specifically what drugs do to the developing brain. So I was in a great position as somebody who understood, hey, if a fetus is exposed to cannabinoids from a mother, either whether she's taking CBD oil, she's smoking a joint, or she's eating an edible, what does that do to the brain? What does that do to the mom's health? How does that, pass through? Does it pass through the placenta? Like, what's going on? And so we started really some of the first research talking to mothers when I was based in Denver, Colorado. There was, of course, a lot of cannabis consumers there, and we're like, hey, all these moms are using cannabis and their babies don't have, they don't have any birth defects or not. And in fact, most of their children are in fact not just not like healthy, but like some of them were actually pretty intelligent, like all the things that you wouldn't expect, right? You're like, oh, that's a weed baby or something like that. And so really, when we looked at the science plus what we looked at with mothers, realized that the harms weren't as big as what was being, put out there by the government and by doctors and things like that. And of course, there's been more and more research suggesting, hey, if you lower your dose or if you decide to go to more CBD than THC, things like that, like you can make it even more safer and talk about harm reduction. And in fact, in some populations, like say postpartum mothers that aren't getting mental health treatment and might be suicidal or might not be taking care of their baby, hey, you know what, taking CBD oil or taking a THC edible or something like that might be a good way to treat your postpartum depression and be a better mother. Cannabis can actually help you. And the most controversial thing, or the thing that people don't understand, it's like once you become pregnant, people just think of you as a vehicle for a baby. It's all about the baby and it's not about the mother, which, yes, we have to protect the baby, but like if the mom is going to kill herself or harm herself or not take care of herself, that's actually bad for the baby as well, right? And so we also have to remember that not every mom is a healthy mom, right? Not every pregnancy is a planned pregnancy. And in fact, in the United States, we're like the worst for unplanned pregnancies. Nobody really, uses birth control properly here. It's like, it's a whole nother story, but, when we talk about a mother, right? Like if I became pregnant, I have fibromyalgia, I have all these different health conditions, I'm in a lot of pain. I can't just use nothing. And so for some mothers, if they were on opioids already, right? Like, okay, you're on MS Contin or morphine or something for pain, and then you get pregnant, do you continue your morphine while you're pregnant? Is that good for your baby? I know for my research that opioids are not great for new brain cell growth. They're a little bit dangerous. And so harm reduction, I would say definitely, what's the impact of opioids versus THC or CBD on the developing brain? I would say, hey, if you can switch from opioids to CBD oil, if CBD oil isn't strong enough, CBD oil with a little bit of THC, something like that, and navigate those harm reduction conversations. But we created a 10-module course that goes over the science, that goes over harm reduction suggestions, how to talk with your doctor, all those kinds of things, because again, it's all about what state you're in. A lot of people, have the freedom now to talk to their doctors or choose a different doctor. But then, some states you're like, okay, a CPS or Child Protective Services is getting called on you if you even ask a question like, can I breastfeed and use cannabis? Okay, we're making the call. So you have to be smart. You have to educate yourself. But I always stress with mothers, don't smoke marijuana while you're cannabis. And I hate to say, like I say marijuana just because in certain states they don't, but even that term is like, has political charge to it. But in cannabis, right? Like, don't smoke cannabis in front of your children. Don't smoke it while you're breastfeeding, things like that. It seems like very common sense things, but you'd be surprised sometimes where people are like, oh, it's healthy. Like it's cannabis. It's got all these antioxidant benefits. I was like, smoke is not beneficial to your baby. That's my big thing. I'm like, don't smoke weed in front of your kids or like breastfeeding your kids. Like, that's it. Like, otherwise I'm not judgmental about it.
Can you tell me the two things real quick? What's the name of this 10-module course? Let's get that information out there. We are working with other mental health companies that are really focused on supporting the mental health of mothers, or the mental health of women who are in childbearing ages, right? So not necessarily just people who have already had a birth, but people who have maybe had a miscarriage, or people who are trying or going through IVF or whatever the case may be. So if you could give us the name of that, that'd be super helpful for those maternal mental health providers.
Sure. It's actually at cannabisandmotherhood.com. It's really
Perfect.
easy. And the course is called Cannabis and Motherhood.
Cannabis and motherhood. Perfect. I am going to get that information out there immediately, Dr. Ross. And then, can you tell us a little bit about what's the difference between CBD and THC and the different terms we're hearing, like why not marijuana or weed? Why say the term cannabis instead? Like, tell us a little bit about that because the truth is, I might just all call it weed. And so I don't know who else is all just calling it weed and not necessarily understanding that there's differences based off of what it is and what's involved in the process.
Yeah, exactly. We hear a lot right now in the cannabis industry about reframing some of the language around cannabis because it was rooted in racism. So the cannabis is actually, whether it's hemp that contains mostly CBD or whether it's, again, we call marijuana plants that are mostly THC, very little CBD. They all come from the same plant. So the scientific name for cannabis, Cannabis sativa, right? So that's where the plant was named. But marijuana was really the word for it because of the laws that were created. So we called cannabis marijuana, and that was based in racism and based in the laws that were passed saying, okay, we can't have white women using cannabis and they'll run off with like Black or Hispanic men or things like that. Like that was like literally the stories. Like if the whole thing with, if you look at racism and cannabis, like there's a whole history of it that's just really, really awful.
Wow.
So we used to have cannabis as part of our medical products. It used to be like in our cough syrup. It used to be, for things like diarrhea and things like that. Like it was used all the time. And then literally we had this, different people in our leadership that were basically framing that cannabis was not something that, again, we should have, that it was going to have horrible influence in society. And so we created all these marijuana laws. And even the word marijuana, it was like marijuana with the J is how we say that now, but it was like marijuana with an H. And so a lot of the cannabis laws across the country are like marijuana with an H. So it's like even spelled weird. But across the country, when we've been trying to legalize, some groups are actually trying to change the word, like, okay, the medical marijuana dispensaries or recreational marijuana dispensaries, we're trying to change it back to cannabis and take away that language around it. Some people don't like to say pot, some people don't like to say weed, or say, again, there's less negative connotations around it. I mean, people want to sort of reframe it to more medical, right? Cannabis sounds very medical, weed and pot doesn't, but the problem is that, you sort of have to meet sometimes patients and consumers where they're at, right? And so if their whole life they've heard about it as weed or pot, and then you're like talking about cannabis, there's people out there that don't even know what cannabis is. It's sort of funny because we're in our bubble, right? But you have to remember that over 50% of people don't even know the difference between THC or CBD. They couldn't tell you what they are or what they do. And so you have to remember, it's like, if you're talking to a community that really has no idea, if you want to say, hey, let's talk about marijuana and is it safe? How does it work? And then we can say, hey, from now on, once you know about this, the proper way to talk about it is cannabis. But, it's like, you sort of have to educate them first on what it is. And then like, let's move to like the more politically correct versions of this. But there are so many people, again, like working on social equity with cannabis and really helping, again, restorative justice, helping make sure that people that went to prison for cannabis, again, we know that across the country and in other countries as well, that primarily people of color are the ones that go to prison for even just having a joint or selling a joint. I have a very close friend that now works with Last Prisoner Project, which is a great nonprofit helping people to get out of prison or in prison for cannabis, or helping people that once they got out, right? It's like you go to prison and you're screwed for life. It messes up your career, messes up everything. And if you went to jail because you sold somebody like $10 of weed back like 20 years ago, like that shouldn't be impacting your life right now, but it does. And so I have a lot of people I've worked with, groups I work with from Drug Policy Alliance on down, that are really focused on really reversing that impact of the war on drugs and trying to make things right. And anytime we pass laws, we got to make sure it's like, doesn't just benefit rich white dudes from Wall Street coming in, selling cannabis while there's people in jail for it. So I just wanted to put that out there because it's so important when we think about these things. I think we really have to be mindful of the impact of legalizing things, both on the patients, but and society and public health, and how we talk about these things is so important. And it's still a battle because I swear educating doctors, they can get some of the basic science things, maybe wrapped around about it, but because it's really hard for them to go, okay, for 50 years of my life, I thought cannabis or marijuana was bad, and now it's cannabis and it's good. And it's sometimes confusing for them. And then to add on the other layer, you're okay, and then make sure that you're, talking about this in a way that there's not bias for your patients, and things like that. Or that you're not only testing Black moms for cannabis, during pregnancy, there's all sorts of just a lot of racially charged conversations sometimes that have to happen. But again, it's just I love that this is the year, the last 2 years we're really helping people learn what their biases are and how to help, right? And I say to again, all my white clinician friends, I was it's our duty, we gotta do the work, right? And make it better. And so I love these conversations. It's please know what you don't know about cannabis and about a lot of other public health issues.
So. So what I hear you saying is that cannabis, marijuana, weed, and pod are all the same thing. They're just different. They just go by different names in different communities and based off of maybe different generations and preference of terms. So tell me, what is the difference between CBD and THC?
Okay, perfect. So those are the big ones. So there's almost over 100 cannabinoids in the plant. And so a cannabinoid is any compound that can activate cannabinoid receptors in your brain. So some of these cannabinoids are made in plants like cannabis, and there's actually some other ones too that make them, like echinacea makes cannabinoids, and that's an herb people take for the common cold.
Nice.
But then there's also cannabinoids we make in our own body. So these are called endocannabinoids. So we make anandamide and 2-AG and some other things. So they're floating around in our body and our brain, and they're activating receptors. And so THC and CBD. They act a little bit differently in the brain, even though they're both cannabinoids that are made by the cannabis plant. When we smoke cannabis or we eat it, they are doing different things. And so THC is really the active ingredient in most cannabis products. Again, CBD is the active ingredient in most hemp products. Some cannabis products you can get in the dispensary have both CBD and THC, but this is what THC does. Goes in your body and it'll bind really strongly to a type of cannabinoid receptor we call CB1. So the CB1 receptor. And when it activates that, what it does is it causes euphoria, that happiness, that high feeling, that bliss feeling. It also decreases inflammation and can decrease pain. Depending on whether you're an experienced user or not, it can make you a little sleepy, a little drowsy, especially first-time users, or if you're someone like me that has been using it for 15 years and still gets sleepy during the day with THC, it happens. But THC can do a lot of things. It also, besides activating those CB1 receptors, there's also CB2 receptors, which are on the immune system. So it does have anti-inflammatory activities. So there are receptors, CB1 and CB2 receptors all over your brain and body. So that's why THC, when you take it, it can actually have a lot of health benefits for every single body system.
Yeah.
Okay, so CBD, what is that? So CBD works a little bit differently. I won't get into the super high level pharmacology of it, but basically it's not really binding to those cannabinoid receptors. Its main activity is that it's actually increasing the levels of your own natural endocannabinoids in your body. So I mentioned that there's these endocannabinoids that your body makes, anandamide and 2-AG. Anandamide is also called your bliss molecule. So it acts a little bit like THC, but it's a little bit weaker. But say, runner's high and things like that, that's linked to our endocannabinoids. So if you ever run and you're I feel great, that's your anandamide talking. So CBD is actually increasing levels of that bliss molecule, which then are binding to your CB1 receptors and making you feel good, having those anti-inflammatory effects. It also is really one way it works differently than THC is that it also binds to your serotonin receptors. And so that's why it works really well for mental health. anxiety and things like that. Sometimes THC can cause anxiety in some people. So it's like, why would you choose THC versus CBD besides it being legal in one place or not? Like if you lived in a place where both are legal, you know, why would you choose one or the other? And, you know, some people don't like being high. Again, you can always microdose THC, you know, always talk to a healthcare professional when you're starting off with cannabis and you're not really sure, you're on a lot of medications, right? Like I always frame that up as like, don't doctor Google yourself, like make sure you know what you're doing, because it is a drug. Like these are drugs. Even again, I don't say like they're not illicit drugs. It's just anything that works on your brain, like, you know, from your caffeine on down is a drug. So CBD, right, is a little, I would say, a weaker of a stimulator of your CB1 receptors, but it's still very powerful. It's one of the most powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. It's really helpful for so many things, like keeping your brain cells healthy and happy as you get older. So it really does have activities throughout the body and brain. So I would say, you know, it's not that THC is for getting high and CBD is for getting healthy. You might see some of that garbage on the internet. I don't like that at all. Both THC and CBD are healthy, and they both are beneficial. But again, it's about how you use it, you know, what the dose is that's right for you. And just remember that we all have endocannabinoid systems, and especially women. This is the most important part. Women actually have more of the bliss molecule than men, which is like, hey, but it's actually located in our reproductive system, in our uterus. So we actually make the most bliss molecule in our uterus. And so the endocannabinoid system regulates fertility, it regulates our menstrual cycle and all that. There's a lot of things at play. And so I always tell women, I'm like, you have painful cramps, if you're irritable, you have anxiety, you know, you have like women's health issues, going through menopause, all these things can be helped by CBD, THC, or stimulating your endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because we actually have some products that are CBD based, from a wonderful company called Ladykind. I hope you got some too. They have some wonderful products. We could talk about it later. But Ladykind makes these products. One is called Rise Up, and it's a daily mind cleaning tincture. Am I pronouncing that right?
This is mind clearing, I think, not cleaning. Although I could use some mind cleaning too.
I need some cleaning too. I do. Probably right now because I even said the wrong thing. And so we have the Rise Up, that's for clearing, and then we have the Wind Down, that's for relaxing. And these are Ladykind, so they're based for women. And also the Tough Love, which is the pain relieving cream. And these are super important to me. I don't know, Dr. Ross, if we I know we didn't talk about it before in this particular moment, but I had a hysterectomy last year, and it's because my family has this whole women's health issue, right? And most of the women in my family had hysterectomies, or what they were calling at the time partials, in their 20s and 30s, and I was able to make it right up until 40. So I turned 40 last September, and so at 39 and a couple months, I had my hysterectomy. And I wish that I would have known about some more of these kind of products and the products that you're talking about. I don't regret having the hysterectomy at all. That's a whole nother thing. And my doctor was perfect. I love Dr. D from Innovative OBGYN Care. I also recognize that there's lots of women, many friends that I have that are dealing with, and not just dealing, suffering really with endometriosis and all different types of women health issues, and or physical health in general, and they don't necessarily know how to treat it. They don't necessarily want to take some of the stronger drugs that are prescribed, and would rather something a bit more natural like CBD, which what you're talking about, or products that maybe have some THC in them. But it really comes from, they would rather have these, but are still dealing with the taboo of anything associated with cannabis, or like we used to say, marijuana or pot, right? So tell me a little bit about how you help people get over their taboos, how you help them by saying, you know, I know you're going through this, and this is maybe a better option for your health than this. How do you even get that message out there?
Yeah. So back in the day, one of the easiest. Ooh, is that me in the echo in the background?
I don't know. Let me mute
Okay.
myself just in case.
Okay. So back in the day, the easiest way to start removing some of the stigma around cannabis and women's health was by educating the doctors. And so, having those conversations, whether one-on-one or whether they were at a women's health conferences. I did a lot of speaking engagements, just talking to patients and doctors about, hey, this is how your endocannabinoid system works. Here's your bliss molecule in your uterus. Did you know that Bayer, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies out there, actually has a patent on using cannabinoids for women's health for endometriosis? Oh yeah, they've had a patent for maybe like 8 years, 9 years, and they never did anything with it. So
Wow.
yeah, so this isn't it's so funny because we are taught the message that cannabis is wrong, that pharmaceuticals are safe because they're FDA approved and researched for every single thing. And yet the same people that are selling those pharmaceuticals or those over-the-counter pain relievers are the ones holding patents on cannabinoids, and actually, like, to be honest, they're sort of like suppressing
Prevenient.
those
Yeah.
medications from coming out, probably
Yeah.
because they either they would be competing with their sales, right? Who would go for Midol when you got something like CBD or THC product that is much
Yeah.
more effective for that, right? And
Yeah.
I'm also somebody who struggled with pelvic pain. That's why I'm so passionate about this. So
Yeah.
I went through several surgeries. I went through a laparoscopy for endometriosis 5 years ago. They found some issues. I actually went under the knife actually a week ago. So
Yeah.
I was recovering in bed for most of the week, but I had another one. I also had a cold cone biopsy for like stage 0 cervical cancer. My
Yeah.
God, thank God we caught it early.
Yes.
But I was recovering in bed from this, and it's interesting because I've gone through this process, the surgery process, on traditional meds and on plant medicine. So
Yeah.
I lived in Colorado maybe 5-6 years ago when I had that first surgery, and my doctors, even though cannabis was legal in Colorado, were like, you can't be on cannabis, I won't do the surgery, you can't be on opioids and cannabis. And I'm like, I don't really even want to be on opioids. So
Yeah.
I had a very traditional doctor. So they made me stop everything that I was using, and I was on like morphine, I was on Lyrica, like I was on a ton of things. I was doped up, I was on a walker, like I was a mess. I had some
Wow.
other health problems, but like I was really not good. And it was horrible because here I was like, I'm a cannabis researcher, not using cannabis, and like
Yeah.
drooling on myself. Like literally that
Yeah.
was my life for a little bit. I went through the surgery, all hopped up on opioids and things like that, and then ended up having to go off the opioids and using cannabis to get off of being on morphine for a year and a
Yeah.
half, which was the most unpleasant experience of my life.
Mhm.
Up until when I started using the cannabis, and then I was like, oh my God, light bulb, like this is how we need to get people off of opioids.
Yeah.
This time around, when I started using the CBD products, and it was really nice because I had the Ladykind products. So I was like, okay, you can use the CBD for the inflammation.
Yeah.
The rise up and the wind down. I ended up using the wind down tincture, which has both CBD and CBN in it, and
Yeah.
also some valerian root. So that's actually something that helps with like muscle spasms and pain. It helps you be a little sleepier. So for me, I wanted to rest and heal after surgery. So it was
Yeah.
great. I was like, okay, I'm going to take this instead of the opioids that they prescribed. And I also used a little bit of the cream. You can't put it in any incisions or fresh wounds, but of course you can put it on your pelvis or anywhere where it hurts. It's got some lidocaine in it as well, so it's super effective for pain relief. So
Yeah.
like I took that and I just went to sleep, and like I woke up and I didn't have any of those issues, when you have like opioid withdrawals or irritability or things like that. Like
Mhm.
there's no risk of addiction or anything like that with CBD. So it's like such a nicer process. So I went through that with surgery stuff, but like in the day to day when I'm not like trying to heal from something major, right? How do you deal with being a chronic pain patient, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And still working and still functioning. And I will say this is that being on all the pharmaceuticals, I could not function back in the day with
Yeah.
chronic pain.
Yeah.
I was on 2 modes. I was either asleep or like out of it. Like my brain wasn't working. And it's like I think that a lot of chronic pain patients, like you can manage maybe if you're doing a job that's like not super brain intensive, like it's like people are barely working, like they're present, but like not really there, you know?
Yeah.
For me, you know, to write books, to talk to patients in telehealth, you know, all day, like you have to be present. And so for me, getting rid of brain fog from pain, getting rid of the pain, boosting like, you know, my mood, because chronic pain comes with depression and anxiety and
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
I found that CBD oil is so much more helpful than THC. THC made me unfocused, a little sleepy. It still makes me sometimes like more anxious. So I am really about CBD during the day. I will take THC gummies and stuff at night for muscle spasms and pain, but or you know, having a really difficult day for pelvic pain, like way like through the charts, like should be in the ER. But like for the most part, I use CBD oil. So for me, like the Rise Up tincture is like a morning one. I love this. It's just like, it's really good for focus. So people don't realize it's like CBD. Some people use CBD for sleep. Some people use it for energy, but it's really about, I think, how these products are formulated, what they're combined with. Some products are just CBD. Some products are CBD plus other ingredients. So like this one has maca root in it. It's got vitamin B5 too. It's actually a really different formula. They spent like 3 years developing these formulas for women's health. And so maca root is interesting because it's something that actually I wasn't as familiar with it. I actually learned about it back in the day for like, you know, increasing male sexual desire and things like that. And then found out it was actually helpful for menopause, for hot flashes, for anxiety. You don't have to be in menopause for it to help with anxiety. It also helps with energy and focus and attention and things like that. So that was funny. That was like a plant where I was like, oh, I was taught back in school that this is for like, you know, strong men, you know, and it's like actually for women too.
Isn't that always how the marketing happens? And then we find out that it's actually better, you know, for us and things like that. For people who are listening to this, I just want to show you the product a little bit because we had an opportunity to play around with it as well. And so it's the actual product shows you what is supposed to be happening on here. So the Rise Up actually has a smiling face to show you the focus and things like that. It's a cute little packaging and everything, and super clear process, right? So you can see the oil. The directions tell you exactly what to do with it, to place it under your tongue and to let it sit there for about 60 seconds before you're swallowing it. So super helpful. And again, there's one, Ladykind has many products, but the ones that we got a chance to play around with were Rise Up, which is good for your focus and attention, and then Wind Down for folks who are having some challenges with sleep or who need to relax. And then, of course, the creams. This is super important to me as a mental health person because we find that a lot of folks are dealing with, especially during the pandemic, dealing with issues with being focused, especially when we're on video all day long and we're trying to, do our work. And then as clinicians working with our clients and things like that, and we are in these rooms and maybe some people don't always get a chance to step out. So Rise Up is a great way to stay focused, and it doesn't have the same benefits. We even sometimes, I'm a tea drinker, black tea, 100% always. One of my favorite tea makers is Grace and Gratitude, a woman-owned company, Black woman-owned company. So definitely believe in tea, but sometimes, when we're coming off of caffeine, we have not as severe as like withdrawal, but you definitely feel the effects, where you don't necessarily feel any effects from these particular products after the time has passed a little bit. So definitely wanting folks to encourage them to support this woman-owned business as well, Ladykind, and the impacts that it has on us, not just in our reproductive years, but overall in general, right? So super excited about. Go ahead, I'm listening.
So I did want to just point. I did. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It looks like we were having a little audio issues there. I did want to point out that it's actually not a woman-owned company. I'm actually a medical advisor to Ladykind. I'm not the owner. So the owner actually is a man called Samit Dat. So it is a POC-owned company. But yes, just a little shout out there.
Well, thanks for correcting me. I need to get it together, right? Maybe I need.
It's funny because the company is actually really interesting. It's family owned. And so his sister actually is a doctor that works in women's health as well, and the nonprofit side really advocating for women's health. So it's nice. I always, it is surprising sometimes to see a women's health company and the CBD space owned by a man. But, again, we need men advocating for women's health. We need all the people, being able to break the stigma around CBD and get these products to the right people.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is, I'll go out and hang out with my friends. I'm, in DC, or we just recently came from Colorado. We were in Granby for one of our friends' weddings, and I noticed that people are not consuming as much alcohol. I noticed that people are making comments around, maybe the edible that they had, or and specifically like a gummy or a little cookie that they had, or they're talking about some juice that they had or something along those lines, or how they made a breakfast this morning with infused butter, or something along those lines, and they're not actually drinking as much, like consuming alcohol. And I'm starting to wonder, do you believe that cannabis, in whatever form, is now replacing that social drinking that we used to have?
Well, I mean, when you think about the reasons why people drink in the first place, right? We have social drinkers, but we also have like the anxious drinkers, right? So we have people that drink to basically, reduce the stress and feel more comfortable in social situations. We also have people like we have the wine moms that are like, oh my goodness, I had the most stressful day ever. At the end of the day, I'm going to de-stress with this glass of wine. What we found is that, obviously as you get older, sort of the effects of alcohol catch up on you. And so we're seeing a lot of people whether they were alcohol drinkers and they started to switch to CBD and cannabis products later in life so they didn't wake up with hangovers or feel tired. They actually felt better, right? It's like with CBD, you can actually reduce your anxiety, but you're still present. Even with cannabis, right? You might feel high or a little giddy, but you don't wake up with a hangover. So that's really, enticing to a lot of people, especially moms. It's like there's so many cannabis moms now, like, and they're coming out of the closet, which is great. So it's like, you can now say it's like, well, there's wine moms and there's cannabis moms, right? There's CBD moms. But the other thing too is really interesting from a drug addiction standpoint. We know that CBD is actually really helpful in reducing cravings for different things. So we know that it can help reduce cravings for alcohol, cravings for cocaine, cravings for almost any drug. So it actually helps people reduce their anxiety and reduce cravings for drugs. And so it's interesting because I know like some people don't even think that they're an alcoholic, like they might be like minor functioning alcoholic or just really dependent on their glass of wine or bottle of wine. They don't even realize it. They don't wouldn't label themselves as an alcoholic or anything, or, substance abuser. But I think a lot of people don't even realize how dependent they are on things, especially during the pandemic. Like I feel like a lot of people switched from, oh my goodness, I'm going through like way too much alcohol, being stressed out at home with the kids, trying to work from home with my kids climbing on top of me. And they're like, I need a better way. And so I think a lot of people have shifted to CBD and cannabis. And then for like social events too, it's super easy because now they make drinks. Like you can get a CBD drink, you can make a cannabis drink, and it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be like hammered. You can literally microdose CBD and THC. Like they have products where it's like 2 milligrams of CBD, 2 milligrams of THC. You can sip it in a can and look like everyone else that's drinking, and you don't have to be like, I'm a weirdo, like the sober person over there. You can still like fit in socially. You can take the gummy now, like it's normal. Like it used to be taboo. I'm telling you, it's like when I used to educate moms, people were like, oh my God, people will think I'm the worst if I like come to a party with a joint while everyone else is smoking cigarettes and drinking. Like that's okay, but if I come with a joint, like that'll be really, really like negatively looked on. And I think that a lot of these novel products are really helpful. I actually created a book called Cbd Oil for Health. You can see it behind me right there. And it does have hundreds of recipes in there, from beauty to drinks and things like that. And so it's like so easy. You can literally, any drink that you make, you can literally drop in CBD oil tincture. So for example, if you want to relax, you can drop in the sleepy wind down. If you want to perk up, you can add rise up to a smoothie or something like that. It's just nice. You need to know what you're using. And I tell people, I'm like, if you are going to socialize, right, with any of these products, you might not know what a new strain, say of a joint or a cannabis joint might do to you. You might not know how much milligrams of THC or something is in a gummy. So I always tell people, if you're not a very, very experienced cannabis user, you bring your own products, just like people bring BYOB with alcohol. It's like, bring your own cannabis products. So that way you don't have that freak out moment where you're like, oh my goodness, I just ate a 30 milligram like gummy. I thought it was 5. And I'm like panicking and freaking out and being weird or something. Know what you're consuming. Always ask if you are going to use something that you're not familiar with. Always look at the back, like the label if there is, and things like that, just to know what you're putting in your body and know what your dose is and things like that, because it's like, with alcohol, we sort of all know, it's like, okay, what is, even if it's a different brand of wine, or we know what wine does to us. Cannabis is a little bit different. There's a lot of different ingredients. There's terpenes, there's CBD, there's THC. Some brands of products have a lot of THC, some have a little, some have none. So it's really important to know, what am I eating? What am I using? How is it going to make me feel? And how do I want to feel? Right? It's like, if you want to feel sleepy, take the sleepy thing. If you don't, make sure you're using the right products.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. A second ago, I asked a question about how do you get the message out there, and you mentioned spending some time with the physicians and other doctors, researchers, helping to get the message through them as they pass it on down to their patients and maybe even their clients. As we think about the future, do you think that the message will also start coming in the form of curriculum development and instruction in schools, in high schools, in colleges, and things like that? I asked that question because I'm really interested in how young people are learning to manage their mental health, how they're learning to manage their physical health. My daughter just recently she's a volleyball player. She got on the varsity team. She's a senior this year. So let me not veer off, right? Because I get upset when I think about it. But she recently sprained her ankle, and I asked her, we're not a big medicine family, but I asked her if she wanted some medicine. She said she didn't. And I was wondering, like, man, I wonder if I should rub some of this cream on her, right? I wonder how that's gonna affect her, what the conversation is gonna be. And next year she'll be in college, right? And she'll have pain. And I'm wondering what she would do in order to alleviate some of that pain. But again, going back to the question of, do you envision the future allowing for these kind of conversations to be taking place in high school, to be taking place in college, in a very organized and curriculum based kind of way, but one that would allow folks to lean towards the CBD, the cannabis, the THC, based products, or not?
So I think that right now, it really comes down to the fact that cannabis, at least THC containing products, aren't legal on the federal level. And a lot of people sometimes are very confused by that. They're like, what? I can go into a cannabis dispensary. What do you mean it's not legal? Well, again, we have state laws and we have federal laws. And so the federal laws really regulate like what can happen in schools and hospitals and things like that. And so until cannabis is made legal through some laws, or executive orders at the presidential level or something like that, really no college is going to say, okay, we're okay with you taking your THC. And we've seen actually problems where some students are like, I have a medical marijuana card. What do you mean I'm getting, in trouble because I tested positive and I'm an athlete or something like that? So there are different rules for students. There's different rules for student athletes. There's even rules sometimes in hospitals or school staffing where it's like, okay, well, your state is legal, but you work at the school, so you can't use it. And so, I think that legalizing in the federal level will, one, open up changes in policy. It won't happen overnight, but I think that that'll allow for more places to say, hey, medical cards is okay for you to be a student and use. I would say that CBD products in general are safe for most students to use, whether they're in high school or college. And I would say topicals don't get absorbed into the bloodstream. So if you put on a CBD lotion or something, you don't have to worry. about testing positive for anything. Of course, if you take a CBD oil product and it does even have a little bit of THC, right? So full spectrum products will have under 0.3% THC, but you can actually test positive for THC in some cases if you use it a lot, or some patients, like they actually turn a little bit of the CBD into THC, like in their stomach, like there's all sorts of things. So it's like, if you really want to be careful, you want to use a product that has zero THC in it, especially if you're a student. You don't want to have those conversations where, you know, you're kicked off a varsity team or something like that. For using a cannabis product, when you're like, I just was using a CBD product that had THC in it. So like, for example, Ladykind products have 0% THC, so it makes it safe. Now, in terms of like, hey, your kid's a child, right? Like, should a 16-year-old be using CBD oil, you know, or should an 18-year-old in college, you know, what are those conversations about? For the most part, you know, we always try to stress like not using something like during the rapidly developing years. So, you know, don't give your 12-year-old CBD oil without talking to your doctor, right? Sometimes, you know, certain substances are appropriate at some ages and not at others. And in most cases, we say, hey, don't use CBD oil products, you know, under the age of 18. However, we do know that women are menstruating, right? You know, at very young ages. So I would say, you know, talk to your doctor first if you want to use this, say with your menstruating daughter or something like that. In terms of topical products, usually safe.
I'm just talking and I am clearly on mute. And I was like, yes, that's right, Dr. Ross. I was getting excited and you couldn't even hear me. Real quick, talk to me a little bit, because I know we're going to end in a second. Talk to me a little bit about what it means for you to be a woman in business, right? So a woman, you know, associated with products, or a woman, you know, putting out books, a woman putting out articles, which is all part of your business, your brand and all of that. Talk to me a little bit about what your experience is and what's been the best part about being a woman in business.
Okay, so I do have my own holding company called Infused Partners. So I am the CEO of that. We do own multiple websites. I have my own publishing company. Some of my books are published through me. Some are through other publishers. I have 5 books in total. So I have course platforms. I do even have products like Kratom products and things like that. And then I do consult and help launch other brands like Ladykind, for example. So I have created this empire over, you know, the past decade. It's been really, really rewarding. I would say that, you know, going into a doctorate, I thought I would be in a very different career trajectory. You know, I wasn't going to be on TV. I was going to do all these things, but I actually really, really love what I do. And it hasn't always been an easy journey. Let's just say cannabis is probably not the easiest industry to enter in. There's all sorts of issues with trying to, you know, advertise on Facebook or Instagram without getting blocked for, you know, drug language, or you can't really advertise on Google. Things have changed a little bit and eased up a little bit. Like now you can do a little bit of CBD advertising on Facebook and things like that. But as a woman in this space, it's so important because we know that over the years, more and more women are being squeezed out of leadership in the cannabis space. It's actually a huge problem. Most of the funding goes to, again, white males. And we also know that women and people of color, LGBTQ, are less likely to be board seats at cannabis companies or the CEO. And so being a woman CEO allows me to help inspire other women in the industry. I try to educate on like, how do you get into the industry? A lot of women, you know, even in college will be like, what do I study? How do I become like you? Like, what do I do? And, you know, give them a lot of insight into what are the skills you need to take. Now there's even like college courses and things like that, even like college degrees in cannabis now, which is so cool. They didn't exist before. But as a woman in business, I would say, don't give up. Find mentors, ask questions, ask for help, work with other women, right? Support other women. I think that's really, really important. Also, the biggest mistakes I've made along the way was things like, you know, men don't invest in women without a male on the executive team or things like that. If I could have told myself back in the day, I was like, you don't need men. It's okay. You are the boss. I have a PhD and an MBA. And yeah, I was still being told by a lot of people, you know, oh, well, you're just a scientist. I was like, I think I passed that point. Thank you. Or, I had men come into investor meetings and act like, and think I was a secretary. And I'm like, okay, you can go now.
Yeah, yeah.
Where's Michael? So my name is Michele Ross, but because I'm Dr. Ross, people either think I'm a man and then they get mad when they show up and I'm not a man. I'm like, did you not Google me? I'm not a man. So you know what? It's all about the right people. So the right investors, the right team, hire the right people. If you find that someone is not a fit, whether they're not the right investor, they're not the right partner, they're not the right CEO, get rid of them because you need to hire and fire. Sometimes you make a mistake and it's really important to course correct as a business owner. If you work with a brand and they're not who they say they are, right? Like the culture isn't right or it's not fit, or they say like, hey, we have these ingredients, but they're not actually like, they're not doing the right things. Drop them as a client. Like it's really important for you as a woman in business to uphold your integrity, right? And then make choices that are right for you and not for anyone else. You're not here to make friends. You are hopefully as a again, like a socially driven, socially conscious entrepreneur, which is like the road that I take. I try to do everything with like morals and really, making a good impact. But like, you have to stay on course and do the things that are right for you, because everyone will try to make you do a decision that's better for them. Make sure that you get paid, make the impact that you want to make, because again, women make less, have less impact. We need to make money to change the world. So I was like, don't be afraid of using your talents in this industry or any other industry to make a difference and make money, because again, that's how you make an impact.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love it so much. We talked about so much. The hour went by so daggone fast, right? But I absolutely love it. And everybody who knows me knows that I'm such a nerd. So I love talking about the science behind everything. And I appreciate so much being able to have a conversation with another socially conscious driven woman who's doing business and who's making a change. So I 100% appreciate you for being on here with me and for spilling the tea on all things related to, not all things, but on some things related to cannabis, right? Because we didn't even have enough time to talk about how it affects so much other things. But I know that I learned a lot when it comes to CBD and THC and how it's used. I didn't even know these things, right? I didn't even consider it around inflammation or things like that. Of course, we think about it in terms of euphoria and we think about it in terms of decreasing pain. But I learned so much here how it binds to certain things in our body as well. I really want to go back and emphasize your 10 module course, which is that Cannabis and Motherhood. So for moms out there, for women who are in those childbearing ages, for those of you all who are listening or watching and you have women who could benefit from that course, please absolutely get that information over to them. Again, it's Cannabis and Motherhood. Making sure that we're definitely promoting Ladykind and the work that they are doing and the impact that it has on our body and on our mental health as well. So making sure that we support that business as well. And for all of your books that you're writing, I love that you're an author and you're doing it out there. So thank you so much. Are there any last words that you have? Any last bits of spilling the tea for our audience?
I would just suggest every woman out there, if you are curious about plant medicine, learn up, talk to somebody that knows what they're doing. I perform harm reduction and cannabis education consults, and there's so many other great practitioners out there. So don't do it alone.
Perfect. How do they get in contact with you, Dr. Ross?
Sure. So my main website is drmicheleross.com. That's DrMicheleRoss.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Twitter, all the places at that same handle.
And like you said a second ago, did you Google me? Right? But you said to that person, that investor,
I'm everywhere.
Did you Google me? You better Google me. You all see how to write her name, Dr. Michele Ross. And for everybody who's also watching, thank you for coming on and spilling the tea with me, Dr. P. Dr. Ross, thank you for coming. For those of you guys that want to get in contact with us, specifically around mental health or training and consulting, definitely reach out to us through our website, onyxtherapygroup.com, or hit me up individually. On Instagram, I am Mahogany Sunshine. I like to shine bright, as you can see, and I love the summer as well. So Mahogany Sunshine, Onyx Therapy Group. Find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the things. And as you do that, make sure you reach out to Dr. Ross too, Dr. Michele Ross, and learn more about cannabis, cannabis-based products, and how it really has an impact on both our physical and mental health as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Ross. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.